Hi everyone, and welcome to Protocol 36, and in today's video, I'll be theorizing who will be the main villain of the new Fantastic Four film by Marvel Studios. Now before we get started, if at any point you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you could drop a like, as that would really help out the channel. Thank you. Now even though we don't really know when the new MCU Fantastic Four film will drop, my guess is around 2024, which would give enough time for Jon Watts to work on the film after he's done with Spider-Man No Way Home. That said though, I still want to make a theory on who the villain is going to be, especially after it's been announced that the Fantastic Four are indeed coming into the MCU. For me, it's never too early to speculate what the film could be about. That said though, let's theorize what kind of villains we could see in the film. I think one of the more likely villains that we could see in the MCU Fantastic Four film is the Super-Skrull. In the comics, after the Fantastic Four was able to prevent the Skrull Empire's invasion of Earth, the Skrull Emperor Dorak VII devised a plan to strike back against the Fantastic Four. Dorak chose the warrior named Kl'rt, who was able to mimic the abilities of the Fantastic Four. Kl'rt's abilities to mimic the Fantastic Four was so impressive that he became stronger than the Thing, had greater pyrokinesis abilities than the Human Torch, had better control of invisibilities and force fields than the Invisible Woman, and could even stretch further than Mr. Fantastic himself. The Super-Skrull was also able to retain its abilities to shapeshift and was sent to Earth to defeat the Fantastic Four in order to pave the way for a new Skrull Empire invasion. Though I think we'll see the Super-Skrulls in the MCU, especially in the Secret Invasion Disney Plus show, if not definitely after, I do believe that we will get the Fantastic Four after the show has already come out. So there's a very good chance that we could see Kl'rt in not only in the film but also in the Secret Invasion show. They could also use the show to set up the Fantastic Four movie and even possibly show Reed Richards and his partner Sue Storm, potentially show how they got their powers in the MCU along with Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm. And they could also play into how the Skrulls are defeated by the end of the show, which could cause Kl'rt to want revenge and eventually mimic their powers in their film. But I feel like for a show that might be 6 to 8 episodes long, might be a bit too much. So I don't think Super-Skrull will be the main villain of the film, but you never know. After all, that would be an awesome thing to see. Another villain I think has a chance of being in the film as the main villain is the Puppet Master. Now if you don't know, the Puppet Master is named Philip Masters, who moved to the US at the age of 8, and growing up he was socially awkward. He had no friends, his mother died sometime later, and when he was young he was often bullied, which caused him to have some sort of obsession for puppets. After he finished university, he went into business with his friend Jacob Reese. Philip however was jealous of Reese's wealth and of course the family he had, which caused him to sabotage his workplace. But Reese was able to find this out and the two of them had a fight, which caused a huge explosion that killed Reese and unfortunately blinded his daughter, Alicia, who you might be familiar with as the love interest of Ben Grimm, the Thing. Eventually Philip Masters was able to play the explosion off as an accident, which then he started a relationship with Reese's wife and eventually marries her and adopts Alicia. Later however his wife does eventually die, which eventually causes him to lose his sanity. He begins to experiment with radioactive clay puppets that he uses to control specific individuals' bodies. The Puppet Master in my opinion is one of Marvel's creepiest villains, not only because of what he can do but also the way he looks and drawn in the comics, and definitely has awesome potential on the big screen. We did get a mention of him in one of the Fox Fantastic Four films in the form of a deleted scene which was added in the 2005 Fantastic Four extended cut, which has a scene that shows a lot of puppets and Alicia mentions that those belongs to her father. He also made an appearance in the 2005 Fantastic Four movie Time game, so I hope that one day we could see him on the big screen sooner or later. Whether or not he's going to be the main villain of the film, I think that's definitely a possibility, and if they do, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if Jon Watts decides to use some of his skills as a horror director, because as we all know that he did direct a horror film called Clowns. But one character I think has more of a chance of being the main villain is Mole Man. The Mole Man was the first ever villain the Fantastic Four has ever faced. Harvey Elder fell into a massive cave, leading him deep into the underground realm of Subterranea. Soon after, his eyes were permanently damaged after he gazed directly upon a huge number of reflective diamonds, making him partially blind, and developed some level of radar sense, similar to Daredevil's. He secluded himself from the surface world forever, and later Elder called himself the Mole Man and began exploring his new home. He eventually became the ruler of the creatures that lived in Subterranea, also known as Moloids. One of the reasons why I think Mole Man could be the main villain of the first MCU Fantastic Four film is because, like I said before, he was the first ever villain Marvel's family has ever faced. And the reason why this is important is because in Spider-Man Homecoming, another MCU movie directed by Jon Watts, the Vulture was the main villain in that film, and the Vulture was the first ever villain to be a physical threat to Peter Parker. Obviously the first ever villain Peter fought was the Chameleon, but we can all admit that he was never really a massive threat to Peter in terms of a physical threat, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did recreate this cover on the posters or even on the big screen. He was never used introduced in the movies, though you could argue is probably understandable. But I do believe that in the 2015 Fantastic Four film, they did have Tim Blake Nelson, who, if you don't know, was in the Incredible Hulk movie, and they had him to play Dr. Harvey Alder, who hadn't become Mole-Man yet, but they changed his name to Harvey Allen. I think it's mostly because he was going to die in the film, which I believe he eventually did. Plus, there are a lot of creative and great ways you can use the character, therefore expanding and showing more love for other Fantastic Four villains other than Doctor Doom. That said though, I still need Doctor Doom to make an appearance in the MCU someday, not only to face the team but also the Avengers one day. Speaking of Doctor Doom though, I don't really think he will be the main villain of the film, and I think most people would agree because of the fact that he was the main villain in pretty much all of the Fantastic Four movies, except for the Rise of the Silver Surfer. The Silver Surfer, or Galactus, was the main villain of that film, but Doom was in it and did play a huge part in the film. And I think it's best for the MCU Fantastic Four film to not only be different from those films, but also provide different and unique villains that has been important in the Fantastic Four comics. And that's not to say that I don't want Doctor Doom to be in the film. I definitely think he will be, but just in the post-credit scene, in order to set him up and become a major character in the MCU going forward. For Galactus and Annihilus, I think it would make more sense for them to be introduced in the sequels, especially Galactus for a future Fantastic Four film, and hopefully the Silver Surfer, because not only how popular he is, but also how important he is in the comics. I wouldn't say the second film, because the Tim Story Fantastic Four films already did that in their second film, and I think it's more likely that they will set him up for an Avengers movie down the line, kind of like they did with Loki. For Annihilus, because we have yet to see him in the live action Marvel movie yet, there is a very good chance that we could see him in the first film, especially as the main villain, because he lives and rules the negative zone, which is a huge deal in the Fantastic Four comics. And in the MCU, they could possibly use that to say that it's another section in the quantum realm, therefore introduce him that way. But I think it's more likely that they may use him in one of the Fantastic Four sequels, and possibly even use him for other MCU projects down the line, like Nova, and potentially loosely adapt the Annihilation Wave. Though it is worth noting that the Annihilation Wave was one of the many times that Xandar did get destroyed in Marvel Comics, and in the MCU all we know is that Thanos and his Black Order decimated Xandar to get the Power Stone. We don't know if he destroyed half of the planet or the entire thing, but because there's a Thanos we're talking about, it is safe to assume that half the Xandarians survived. At least I hope so. Once again though, I think and definitely wouldn't be surprised if Mole-Man does become the main villain in the film, and if he does, that of course means that they would have to make some changes to the character for him to work in live action. However, I could definitely be wrong, but I'm more interested in what you guys think. Who do you think the main villain of the first Fantastic Four film will be? Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, please like, and want more, subscribe. To begin, Protocol 36.